It was the most dangerous assignment of Mike Jacobs' career. He went to Beirut, Lebanon, just hours after terrorists bombed the U.S. Marine base there. Katie Crowther has the story behind the story. Katie.
Carol, it was October of 1983. Mike and photographer Jim Angeli were in Tel Aviv working on a story when the bombing shocked the world. They decided to make the trek across the border to Beirut. Little did they know it would be the scariest adventure of their lives. It was a devastating scene. 241 American servicemen killed when terrorists attacked.
To this day, we don't know how we got in and got out safely.
Mike Jacobs will never forget the advice he got before heading to Beirut.
There's going to be a convoy of 5 cars. Don't be in the first car because those are the ones that hit the landmines. And don't be in the last car because those are the ones that the snipers pick off.
Then on the way, a frightening mishap.
And all of a sudden, our car had a flat tire. The rest of the cars went on. We have a driver who doesn't speak English. We don't speak Lebanese, but we managed to change that tire like it was the Indy 500.
Thankfully, they arrived in Beirut unharmed. But what they witnessed in the war zone still haunts them.
Rescue workers did in fact find more bodies, and with each discovery, the task became more painful.
The assignment was to report on the tragedy. The goal was to find surviving Marines from Wisconsin.
We wanted to get the word back to the families back here.
Even after the bombing, the risk remained. The area was the target of snipers. Mike and his photographer were advised to sleep away from the windows in the NBC News Bureau.
And they said, if you hear thunder in the middle of the night, it's not thunder. It's mortars or rocket fire or something, in which case you should go to the basement.
Mike remembers writing a will in his reporter's notebook.
Should have saved it. Told my wife I loved her.
Ultimately, he made it home. Distraught over the loss of American lives, but thankful to be alive.
I'm Mike Jacobs, News 4 at the airport in Beirut.
Katie Crowther takes a look back at Mike Jacobs' career to remember. Katie.
Carol, there's nothing worse than losing a child, especially when the death is senseless, like losing a child to a drunk driver. Yet one family somehow found the strength to tell their sad story to Mike Jacobs.
Traxan and Jim Port are still numb. They cradled their twin daughters today and mourned their 4-year-old son.
I loved him more than anything in this world.
John Port was killed by a 5-time drunk driver just 4 days after Christmas in 1991. His toys were still under the Christmas tree.
I know when he died in my hands and his life just poured out into my lap and his and all over my hands. Something no father should have to go through.
In their darkest hour, the family welcomed Mike Jacobs into their home.
Part of our job is to go out and talk to people and see if they would like to comment. And you never know if you're going to get the door slammed in your face.
I know.
And yelled at, which would be understandable. Or if they're going to welcome you in to talk about their son, which is what the Ports did. They were incredibly strong.
Nearly 25 years later, it's still hard for Mike to relive that emotional interview.
That was a really difficult story.
There were so many hugs yet that I had to give him.
The Ports shared a recording of John singing.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas.
The tape had been a Christmas surprise for his mom before John's life was cut tragically short.
Mommy, I wish you a Merry Christmas.
By opening up to Mike, the family sent a powerful message to Milwaukee.
If you're gonna drink, don't drive. Don't be an idiot. Don't kill somebody else's son. If you've got a child, get every last hug and kiss you can, because you never know which one's going to be the last.
Well, Mike Jacobs was one of the first reporters in Rome to cover the death of Pope John Paul II. Katie Crowther has more as we look back at Mike's career to remember. Katie.
Carol, Mike says it was one of the most emotional stories he's ever covered. People from all over the world converged on the Vatican to mourn the loss of a beloved pope who had led the church for 27 years.
The candles are burning for Pope John Paul. As we record this, it's 2 o'clock in the morning Rome time.
Working around the clock, Mike Jacobs brought us live reports from Rome. He was in St. Peter's Square as Pope John Paul II took his last breath.
It is difficult to adequately find the words to describe what we are witnessing here today.
Tens of thousands of faithful streamed into the Vatican, camping out on the cobblestone streets. Many of the devout came from the pontiff's native Poland. Mike also found many people from Milwaukee, including students on a school trip, and Father Peter Mitchell, who was studying in Rome.
He really is our Father, and I would say that's my father has died, and that's the sentiments in our heart right now.
Because the area was so congested, Mike and his crew decided to sleep in their workspace the night before the funeral.
There was a little hardware store about a block from our little motel, and I went in and I bought a bunch of these chase lounges and took them to our workspace. And we slept there because we didn't want to get caught out of position, and we didn't want to sleep on the floor.
Anything to make sure they didn't miss the story. A story they'd been planning for since the Pope's health started deteriorating.
For 6 months before the Pope died, every place I went, I carried my regular suitcase and my Pope suitcase. So if I had to leave from the station, it was in the trunk of my car.
Then his news director made the call.
One day, we heard the word grave condition, and he called in Chopper 4. We flew from Milwaukee to O'Hare, got on a plane to Rome that night.
It turned into a trip of a lifetime that Mike will never forget.
A very emotional, religious experience, regardless of your faith. What a great opportunity.
Decades later, one brave victim told his story to our own Mike Jacobs. Katie Crowther looks back at Mike's career to remember.
They are the boys of St. John's School for the Deaf, young, innocent, vulnerable. And many of them were molested by the man who was supposed to take care of them, Father Lawrence Murphy.
A heartbreaking, sickening story that was difficult to cover.
This one was particularly egregious because of the sheer number of victims, more than 200.
Stephen Geyer is one of those victims. He was just 9 when he arrived at St. John's.
The abuse started when Stephen was 13. Father Murphy woke him up in the middle of the night and took him into a closet.
And then he forced me and pulled my pajamas down. And I didn't really understand.
And Stephen witnessed others being molested by Father Murphy.
Was he a monster?
Yes, more than a monster, definitely more than a monster. It was like he was the devil in a priest outfit.
He was the head priest at St. John's for more than 20 years. At one point, Stephen attempted to reveal the abuse.
I did, though, try to report this to 3 different priests in Madison, and each one said to me, "Oh, this can't be, no way."
You have to admire his willingness, having been a victim, to go public with his experience.
An experience that still haunts him, leading to an answer that needed no translation.
Do you think it's possible to forgive Father Murphy? I think it's the human strength from people like Stephen Geyer, who is still struggling with his issues, but he has found a way to survive and to tell his story.
The pride of Racine, Laurel Clark was one of 7 astronauts killed in the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster back in 2003. One of the most difficult stories Mike Jacobs ever covered. Katie Crowther has more as we look back on his career to remember. Katie.
Carol, tonight's story behind the story shows how reporters often get to witness history. Unfortunately, as Mike Jacobs can attest to, those moments can be heartbreaking. Mike Jacobs will never forget being there in person for the launch of the Columbia Space Shuttle. His focus was on Laurel Clark, the astronaut on board from Racine.
There are about 30 or 40 people from the Racine area down here to watch the launch.
He was with Clark's family, who couldn't have been prouder.
This is the culmination of years of hard work on her part.
Watching the rocket shoot up into the sky was magnificent.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia.
But 2.5 weeks later, the exhilaration of the space mission turned into utter devastation. The shuttle never made it home, bursting apart in the sky over Texas just 16 minutes before landing.
I got to know the family fairly well in the days leading up to the launch. We were down there for the launch, and so you felt this personal attachment. And then Columbia disintegrated while re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. So everybody was so excited. They were here. And instantly they were here.
To this day, the memory brings Mike to tears.
I didn't know this was going to be so tough.
Once again, he was with Clark's family, but under very different circumstances. Memorials formed outside the space station, and a funeral was held. Laurel Clark's husband and 8-year-old son took it the hardest. As a final salute, jets flew overhead in the missing man formation, a painful metaphor for how her family felt.
I feel like there's a missing person right here in our formation, standing right here now, and I think of her.